I was running a tertiary cascade failure simulation when the intercom clicked. The simulation had already killed 3 hypothetical crew members and vented the portside storage bay, which put it in the middle range of outcomes I'd modeled over the past 8 months. The computer wanted me to make choices about which systems to sacrifice. I made them. The hypothetical crew count dropped to 2 survivors. One of them was me, which tracked with my actual history. My name is James West. My title is Systems Loss Specialist, a designation the Terran Cosmological Authority invented for missions where they expect things to go wrong in ways they can't predict. The authority funds deep space operations through accumulated tariffs and manages them with the paranoid secrecy of weapons research. They don't like uncertainty. They like it even less when uncertainty costs them ships and trained personnel. So they created my position, someone whose job is to document what breaks, model what will break next, and recommend what to let go so resources aren't wasted on the dead. I've held this position on 4 missions. The first 3 killed everyone but me. I don't consider myself lucky. Luck implies something other than mathematics. What I am is a statistical residue, the remainder left over when you divide catastrophic loss by the number of people who started. The intercom clicked again. Commander Halyard's voice. West, navigation blister, bring your terminal. I saved the simulation at the 2 survivor mark and disconnected my personal terminal from the wall mount. The terminal was authority issue, a flat rectangle the size of my palm that contained every failure model I'd built for this mission and every piece of data I'd been given access to. The access level was higher than anyone else on the crew except Halyard, because my job required me to know what could go wrong, and the list of what could go wrong included things the authority preferred to keep quiet. The Vituvian's corridors were narrow, designed for a crew of 8 moving efficiently rather than comfortably. I passed 2 of them on my way forward, Engineer Barrow running cable diagnostics and not looking up, and Communications Specialist Yates standing at a viewport watching nothing. We were 14 hours from the observable horizon, the theoretical boundary past which light from the universe's origin had never reached us. There was nothing to see yet. Yates watched anyway. The navigation blister was a bubble of reinforced glass at the ship's bow, large enough for 3 people if they didn't mind proximity. Halyard was there with Dr. Brennan, the mission cosmologist. Brennan was a small man with the kind of concentration that made him forget to blink. He'd been like that since we launched. I'd noted it in my behavioral logs but hadn't flagged it. Some people look at the universe for a living, and the universe tends to stare back. Halyard was looking at a display panel mounted on the blister's interior curve. Final review before we cross. I want your assessment. The probe data was the mission's dirty secret, the thing we all knew about but didn't discuss openly because discussing it would require acknowledging what it implied. 2 unmanned vessels had been sent ahead to skim the observable horizon before the authority approved a manned crossing. One had returned with its onboard clock running 11 years behind mission elapsed time. The other had arrived empty, its interior atmosphere replaced by a substance the labs called organized dust. I'd read the reports. The first probe had experienced no mechanical failure that could account for the time discrepancy. Its systems had functioned correctly. Reality around it had not. The second probe had returned structurally intact, but every molecule of atmosphere inside, oxygen, nitrogen, trace gases, had been converted into microscopic silicate spheres. When the labs modeled the sphere's arrangement, they found patterns that resembled cellular mitosis frozen mid-division. You've read my preliminary assessment. I connected my terminal to the blister's display port. The conclusions haven't changed. Tell me again. No failure mode in the Vituvian's design could produce either result. The first probe's clock discrepancy points to a temporal gradient outside our models. The second probe's interior conversion points to an agent that reorganizes matter at the molecular level without destroying structural integrity. I pulled up the spectral analysis of the silicate spheres. The organized dust isn't random. It's arranged. Something shaped it. Brennan made a small sound, a caught breath. This reads as contact, I said. Not malfunction. Contact with what? Unknown. The data only tells us that something exists past the horizon that interacts with objects from our universe in ways we can't explain or predict. Halyard studied the display. She was tall, with the kind of stillness that came from decades of command decisions. I'd worked with officers who projected confidence. Halyard projected calculation. She was running numbers in her head the same way I ran them on my terminal, and she'd reach a conclusion when the numbers told her to. Brennan. She didn't turn. Your assessment. Brennan moved to the display and touched the image of the silicate spheres. His finger traced the mitosis pattern, 2 spheres pulling apart, smaller spheres arranged around them like chromosomes separating. 23 years ago, I submitted a paper to the Gödel Penrose Institute. The institute is responsible for the theoretical framework behind this mission, the mathematics that suggested the observable horizon might be navigable rather than absolute. My paper proposed something further. He paused. I proposed that the observable universe might be bounded not by the limits of light propagation, but by something structural. A membrane, one of many. The paper was rejected. The reviewers called it philosophically unsound. The mathematics were valid, but the implications were considered untestable and therefore outside the Institute's scope. His hand hovered over the display. I stopped pursuing the idea. I accepted this position because the authority wanted someone who could interpret exotic physics if we encountered it. I did not expect to encounter evidence for my own rejected theory. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. The tremor was subtle, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't trained to catalogue early warning signs. "What do you think we're going to find?" Halyard asked. "I don't know. That's the first honest answer I've given to that question in 8 months. Brennan looked at me instead of her. "What I think is that the probes came back changed because they touched something with structure and agency, something that reorganized what it touched according to principles we don't understand. You're describing an entity. I'm describing contact. The entity hypothesis is one interpretation. There are others." He enlarged the mitosis pattern. "But I keep looking at this and thinking, this isn't random molecular drift. It's organization." Something looked at the probe and decided what it should become. Outside the blister, stars burned in configurations we'd know for another 14 hours. After that, the configuration would change. We would cross the horizon and see what the probes had seen, and we would either come back or become data for whoever came after us. "West." Halyard finally turned to me. "If we encounter what Brennan's describing, an agent that can reorganize matter at the molecular level, what are the failure modes?" I'd run the models the day I read the probe reports and every week since, adjusting for new variables. The answer hadn't changed. Total. If something can convert atmosphere into organized silicate without damaging the containing structure, it can convert anything. Hull, systems, crew. The only failure mode is complete transformation. Can we prevent it? No. Can we detect it early? Maybe. The second probe's conversion was comprehensive, but it took time. Spectral analysis suggests the process moved from the interior outward over several hours. If we monitor internal molecular composition continuously, we might catch the early stages. I pulled up another file. I've already configured the sensors. If conversion begins, we'll know. Whether we can do anything about it is a different question. Halyard nodded. "Brennan, get some rest before we cross. West, stay on the probe data. I want updated models every 4 hours until translation." Brennan moved toward the blister's exit, then stopped. He looked at me with an expression somewhere between recognition and apology. "You've survived 3 missions like this." "Not like this. Nothing's been like this." His mouth twitched toward a smile. "I suppose not." He left. Halyard stayed, watching the stars. I began updating my models, running new failure cascades based on the assumption that whatever had touched the probes would touch us. The simulations were exercises in futility. I couldn't model what I couldn't understand, but futility wasn't a reason to stop. The Authority had sent me on this mission because I kept working when things fell apart. That was the only thing I knew how to do. West. Halyard didn't turn from the viewport. What do you think we'll find? I considered the question with the same attention I gave to system failures. Something that doesn't care what we think. She said nothing. I went back to my terminal and continued running numbers on things that couldn't be numbered. Translation past the horizon was not dramatic. I had expected some kind of barrier or sensation, a marker that distinguished one side from the other. Instead, the Vituvian drifted through a gradient. Stars thinned, redshift deepened. The navigation computer reported increasingly sparse mass readings in every direction until 6 hours after we began the crossing. It reported an absence of detectable mass anywhere. The display showed nothing because there was nothing to show. I was at my station in the systems bay, monitoring internal molecular composition as I'd promised Halyard. The readings were normal. The crew readings were normal. The ship functioned within expected parameters. Outside the ship was a kind of emptiness that made every measurement meaningless. You can't calculate distance without reference points. You can't calculate velocity without something to be moving relative to. The crew rotated through shifts. I noted their movements, their interactions, their physiological responses to the crossing. Navigator Walker spent her watch staring at blank displays, occasionally adjusting parameters that didn't need adjusting. Physicist Doyle paced the observation corridor, stopping at each viewport to confirm what he already knew. Nothing visible in any direction. Security Officer Andrick checked the ship's defensive systems 3 times, then checked them again. There was nothing to defend against. He checked anyway. The void lasted 6 hours. Walker called me to the navigation blister at hour 7. She sat at her station, running parallax calculations on data that shouldn't have existed. The displays showed something now. A point of light, then another, then clusters of points in configurations the computer couldn't classify. Distance estimate? I asked. I can't get one. She pointed at parallax figures. The computer keeps returning errors. Either these objects are very small and very close, or they're very large and very far, and it can't determine which. More points of light appeared, spreading across the viewport like a field of faint stars. Except they weren't stars. The spectral analysis was wrong. The luminosity was wrong. The spacing was wrong. How many? I asked. Hundreds, maybe thousands. The count keeps increasing as the sensors recalibrate. Walker gripped the edge of her console hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Spatial measurement is breaking. Internal readings say the objects are both inside and outside the ship at the same time. That wasn't possible. I pulled the sensor data to my terminal and ran diagnostics. The sensors were functioning correctly. Reality was not. The intercom activated. Halyard. All crew to observation blister. Bring your stations to standby. I followed Walker forward. The others were already there. Barrow, Andrick, Yates, Doyle, Brennan. Halyard stood at the center of the blister, facing the viewport. I looked past her and stopped. The structures filled the visible space beyond the ship. They were translucent, mountainous, but they weren't structures in any architectural sense. Each one spanned distances that made galaxies look like flecks of pollen caught in amber. The displays struggled to render them, switching visualization modes as they tried to find a framework that made sense. Internal temperature gradients, slow circulatory motion, embedded luminous masses the sensors flagged as stellar clusters in anomalous locations. I counted 7 formations before I lost count. They drifted, not floating, but moving with a purpose I couldn't read. Inside each one I saw what looked like galaxies. Spiral arms, stellar nurseries, dark matter halos, contained within walls that curved like the membranes of soap bubbles. No one spoke. The silence came from the absence of anything adequate to say. Brennan moved to the viewport and pressed his palm against the glass. His whole body trembled now, with something that looked like recognition more than fear. He traced the outline of the nearest formation, following the curve of its boundary. The spectral analysis of the internal clusters. His voice was quiet, but the blister carried it. Run it against standard galactic composition. Walker returned to her console and ran the comparison. The display populated with data, hydrogen ratios, helium abundance, metallicity signatures, standard galactic fingerprints, the kind we'd measured in the Milky Way 1,000 times. Match, she said. The clusters inside these structures have the same composition as known galaxies. They're not simulations or reflections. They're real stellar populations. The circulation patterns. Brennan traced another line on the glass. See how the clusters move inside the boundaries? Gravity would produce orbital mechanics. This is circulation, material flowing through a bounded system. Barrow swore in a language I didn't know. Andrik stood near the blister's entrance with the posture of someone mapping exit routes where none existed. Dr. Brennan. Halyard's voice was carefully neutral. Explain what you believe we're seeing. Brennan pulled his hand back from the viewport. His eyes were wet, but his face had the terrible calm of someone watching a prediction come true. Cells, he said. We're seeing cells. Each structure is a bounded cosmos, a universe contained within a membrane, drifting in whatever medium exists outside universal boundaries. The galaxies inside are organelles. The circulation is metabolism. We're looking at the component parts of something so large that 100 billion years might constitute a single enzymatic reaction. I processed his words the way I processed failure data, without emotion, breaking the statement into testable pieces. Bounded cosmoses, cellular structure, metabolic timescales beyond comprehension. If these are cells, I heard myself say, then the universe we came from is one of them. Brennan looked at me. Yes, we're inside something larger. The implications unfolded in my mind like a cascade failure simulation, each conclusion triggering the next. Our universe was a cell. We had left our cell and entered the space between cells. We were inside something, an organism, a structure, a system we couldn't comprehend. And we had never known it. No one had ever known it. The entire history of human observation, every telescope pointed at the sky, every theory about cosmic origins and endings had been the work of organisms inside a cell trying to understand the cell from within. What's the organism? Barrow asked. He'd moved to the viewport, his face pale. What's the body? Silence answered him. The question was too large for a response. I went back to cataloguing. It was the only thing I knew how to do. I noted the number of visible structures, 12 now, more on the edges of sensor range. I noted their drift patterns, relative sizes, the luminosity variations in their internal clusters. I noted the crew's responses, Brennan's trembling recognition, Walker's white-knuckled focus, Andrik's watchful stillness, Doyle's rapid breathing, Barrow's pallor, Yates's absolute immobility. Halyard stood at the center of the blister, watching everything, calculating numbers I couldn't see. One of the formations near the edge of visibility differed from the others. Smaller, dimmer. Its internal clusters were scattered unevenly, as if circulation had failed across parts of its structure. As I watched, the formation's boundary rippled, not a smooth oscillation but a contraction, a tightening, like a membrane losing integrity. I logged it and kept watching. The mission parameters had assumed we might encounter exotic physics, dimensional membrane effects, or nothing at all. They had not assumed this. No one had assumed this. We had crossed the horizon expecting to find answers about the nature of reality. And instead we had found that reality was a subset of something we couldn't name, couldn't influence, couldn't comprehend. Behind me, Brennan said something to Halyard too low for me to catch. I heard the tone, not fear, not wonder, but the exhausted relief of a man who had been right about something terrible and had spent decades hoping he was wrong. Outside the viewport, the cellular universe drifted past, indifferent to our presence, its metabolism continuing on timescales that made our existence less than a rounding error. I watched and noted what I saw, because documentation was the only response I had to offer. The ship's clocks read 7 hours past crossing. Inside one of the distant formations, a galaxy collapsed and reabsorbed into the surrounding medium. It took less than a minute. I logged the event and kept watching. Halyard convened the crew in the briefing compartment 12 hours after first contact with the structures. The compartment was designed for 8. We fit with room to spare because nobody wanted to stand close to anyone else. I took a position near the aft bulkhead where I could watch faces without being watched in return. The conversation was controlled, which is different from calm. People chose words too precisely, assembled sentences too carefully, as if careless syllables might make the situation worse. Brennan stood at the display panel, cycling through spectral analyses and drift calculations. Doyle sat nearest him with a tablet covered in equations I couldn't follow. The others arranged themselves in a loose semicircle. Halyard at the center, Walker to her left, Barrow and Andrick on opposite sides, Yates in the corner where the lighting was dimmest. "We need shared terminology," Halyard said. "Dr. Brennan, summarize your interpretation for the full crew." Brennan brought up an image of the nearest structure, the one we'd been observing since emergence. Its membrane curved across the viewport like a wall of frozen light, and inside it, galactic clusters drifted in patterns the computer still couldn't fully model. What we're observing are bounded cosmoses. Each structure contains what appears to be a complete universe: galactic populations, dark matter distributions, expansion dynamics, enclosed within a semi-permeable membrane. He highlighted the membrane's edge, where faint luminescence suggested exchange with the surrounding medium. The membranes aren't static. They exchange material with the space between structures. The computer can't classify the exchange medium. It registers as neither matter nor energy nor space-time in any configuration we can model. "You're calling them cells." Barrow's arms were crossed. He'd been running hull diagnostics since we emerged. The results had made him quiet. "That's not terminology. That's interpretation. It's both. The behavior matches cellular biology at scales we've never observed. Internal circulation, membrane permeability, metabolic exchange with an external environment." Brennan switched the display to a time-lapse of drift patterns. "Watch the movement. See how the internal clusters shift position. Gravity would produce orbits. This is circulation, material moving through a bounded system according to internal dynamics we can't measure." "The implications," Halyard cut in before Barrow could. "West. State them plainly." The others turned toward me, the man whose job was to name what was breaking and what couldn't be saved. I'd given this sort of briefing before about reactor leaks and hull breaches. Those failures had causes and consequences I could model. This one did not. "If these structures are cells," I said, "then the universe we came from is one of them. We're not outside reality. We're inside a larger system, an organism, a structure, something we don't have words for. And our universe is a component of that system." "Like an organ," Walker said. "We're inside an organ. Like a cell, inside an organ, inside a body. The scale makes the comparison meaningless." I paused, looking for something that wouldn't collapse under its own absurdity. A cell in a human body might contain 100 trillion atoms. These structures contain on the order of 100 billion galaxies each. The ratio of scale between us and them is larger than the ratio between a single atom and the observable universe. Doyle made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. His stylus went still on the tablet. "What's the organism?" Andrick asked. He hadn't moved from his position near the exit. His posture suggested someone calculating lines of retreat, except there were none. There was only the ship, the void, and the structures drifting past like blood cells in a vessel too large to perceive. If these are cells, what's the body? Unknown. Brennan shrank the image until multiple structures were visible. 14 now, at the edge of sensor range. We're seeing a tiny sample. The organism, if we use that term, operates on scales we can't measure and timescales we can't comprehend. 100 billion years might be a single metabolic cycle. The lifespan of a star might register as a chemical flicker. Then why are we here? Barrow's voice had an edge. What's the point of observation if we can't understand what we're observing? Documentation. I answered before Brennan could. We record what we see. We return with the data. And people with more resources and more time try to make sense of it. That's what the mission parameters specified. That hasn't changed. Barrow looked at me, expression somewhere between contempt and desperate hope that I was right. You think we can go back? After seeing this? The return window exists. The fuel margins exist. Whether we use them is a command decision, not a physics problem. Halyard nodded once. The mission parameters remain in effect. We observe, we document, we return. Whatever we're seeing, whatever it implies, the Authority needs this data. She met each pair of eyes in turn. Questions about meaning can wait. Questions about survival can't. West, status report on ship systems. I pulled up my monitoring data. The numbers weren't reassuring, but they weren't catastrophic, yet. Primary systems are within normal parameters. Secondary systems show anomalies, power fluctuations that don't correspond to any load pattern, timing discrepancies between redundant clocks. The discrepancies are small, fractions of a second, but consistent and increasing. Cause? Unknown. Possibly interaction with the external environment. The medium between structures may be affecting instrumentation in ways we can't detect directly. I hesitated. I'm also seeing early signs of something else. Microstructural changes in the hull plating. The compartment went quiet. Barrow straightened. What kind of changes? The atomic lattice is shifting, slowly, fractions of a percent per hour, but measurably. The pattern resembles... I pulled up the comparison. The organized dust from the second probe. Silicate spheres in geometric configurations. The conversion is in its earliest stages, but it's present. The ship is being converted. Andrik's voice was very controlled. The outer hull shows early molecular reorganization consistent with the probe's final state. Whether the process will continue, accelerate, or reverse, I can't say. The dataset is too small. How long until critical failure? Halyard asked. If the current rate holds, which it may not, about 6 months until hull integrity fails. The probe's conversion was comprehensive and relatively rapid. If this is the same process, it may accelerate. Halyard absorbed this, her expression unchanged. I could see her running the same calculations I had. 6 months was longer than our planned observation window. If we left on schedule, we might return before the conversion became critical. If we stayed, we might not return at all. Continue monitoring, she said. Report any acceleration immediately. Barrow, I want independent verification of West's hull analysis. Already running it? Barrow's voice was grim. His numbers are accurate. I've been watching the same readings since we emerged. The meeting went on for another 20 minutes. Observation shifts, data protocols, contingencies. I logged the decisions and watched the crew. Brennan's trembling had settled into focused intensity. Walker already looked as if she'd adapted to a new operational reality. Barrow radiated the anger of an engineer whose systems had begun behaving outside their specifications. Andrik was quiet and watchful, storing information for decisions he hadn't made yet. Doyle hadn't spoken since his half-laugh. His stylus moved again, equations growing more elaborate and less comprehensible with each line. Yates hadn't spoken at all. She watched all of us from her corner with an expression I couldn't categorize. When Halyard dismissed the meeting, I stayed to run additional diagnostics. The compartment emptied. The display continued cycling through images of the structures. Our context now, the cellular medium we existed within. I worked until third shift, then returned to my quarters to update my personal logs. The documentation was thorough. Crew psychological status, system anomalies, hull degradation rates, observational data on the structures and their behavior. I recorded everything I could measure and noted everything I couldn't. Before I slept, I ran one more simulation. This one modeled an accelerated hull conversion matching the probe's timeline. The results weren't survivable. I logged them anyway and closed my terminal. Outside the viewport, a structure larger than the Milky Way drifted past, its internal galaxies circulating like cells in a vessel we couldn't perceive. I watched it until sleep came, which took longer than usual. 3 days after translation, Walker called me to the observation blister. She'd been tracking movement patterns among the structures, trying to build a navigational baseline where baseline was meaningless. I found her at her console with her hands flat on the surface and her eyes fixed on a display I hadn't seen before. There. She pointed without looking at me. Lower quadrant. Watch the drift pattern. The structures moved with slow, purposeful drift, not random, but guided by currents in the exchange medium. Most moved in the same general direction. One point of light moved differently. It crossed the current, heading toward a structure rather than drifting with everything else. How long? I asked. 6 hours. It's not a structure. Spectral signature is different. No internal stellar populations, no membrane luminescence, and it's moving too fast. The structures drift at almost immeasurable rates. This thing covers distance. I ran numbers. The object's velocity was glacial by human standards. It would take days to cross the gap between structures, but compared to the cellular drift, it raced. Size? I asked. That's the problem. Walker pulled up parallax data. The computer keeps returning inconsistent values. Either the object is changing size, or we can't get a stable reading. Best estimate puts it somewhere between a solar system and a small galaxy. A solar system is not small, a galaxy is not small. Those error bounds said everything about how little we understood. It's heading toward a structure, I said, tracing the trajectory. The one with the irregular distribution, the one I flagged 3 days ago. I noticed. Walker's voice stayed neutral. It's been degrading since we first saw it. Circulation failures across multiple regions. The membranes contracting like a dying cell, if we use Brennan's framework. The object kept approaching. Over the next hours, its shape resolved. Elongated, many-lobed, trailing filaments that split and rejoined as it moved. Biological, but not from any biology I knew. It moved like it knew exactly where it was going. I paged Brennan to the blister. He arrived with Doyle, who had been shadowing him since the briefing, demanding membrane theory answers Brennan no longer had patience for. When Brennan saw the display, he stopped in the doorway and stayed there nearly a minute. There are more. Walker switched to a wider view. I've identified 6 others, all on similar trajectories, all closing on degrading structures. They're targeting the unhealthy ones. Brennan came to the console, hands shaking again. The ones with circulation failures, membrane contractions, irregular internal distributions. They're seeking them. We don't know that, I said. We see correlation, not causation. They might be attracted to some byproduct of degradation. They might be opportunistic. They might be... Watch. The first object reached the degrading structure. Its filaments extended, spreading across the membrane like roots seeking purchase. For a moment, nothing changed. The structure kept its slow contraction, its internal clusters scattered and dim. Then the structure began to fail. The membrane inverted, collapsing inward. The galaxies inside, billions of stars, trillions of planets, whatever forms of life might have evolved there, dimmed and scattered as the internal medium lost cohesion. The process took 6 hours. We watched a time-lapse on Walker's display, the structure shrinking into itself, the object clinging to its surface, filaments pulsing with rhythms that could have been feeding or something we had no name for. When it ended, the structure was gone. The object detached and drifted again, its lobed body visibly altered, larger, denser, the display couldn't decide which. Immune response. Brennan's voice was hoarse. The organism is pruning unhealthy cells, universes that develop irregularities, entropy imbalances, unexpected complexity, pathological structure formation, get identified and culled. You're projecting. Doyle had recovered some composure. We're watching a single event and making conclusions that need far more data. It could be parasitic, opportunistic, symbiotic, dozens of relationships that don't require organized immune function. Then explain the targeting. Explain why 6 objects all move toward degrading structures while healthy structures drift untouched. Doyle didn't answer. The data was limited. The pattern was clear. We need a clinical term, Barrow said. He'd arrived during the collapse, drawn by the comms traffic, and stared at the display like someone watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. Something for the reports. Something that doesn't make us sound like we've lost perspective. Cull bodies. Andrik spoke from behind me. I hadn't heard him come in. That's what they are. That's what they do. The name stuck because it fit, and because no one wanted to think of a better one. I logged it. Cull bodies. Designation assigned Day 3 post-translation. Refers to mobile entities observed targeting degrading cosmic structures. West. Brennan turned to me. His eyes were steady, the tremor suppressed by focus. If the cull bodies are immune response, what does that make us? I weighed the question the way I weighed failure models. A foreign object, an anomaly. Something that crossed a boundary and shouldn't be here. The moment we left our cell, we registered. Are we a symptom? I didn't answer. Brennan already knew what he was asking. If we were a foreign object, the immune system would respond. If we were a symptom of pathology in our home universe, the response might extend beyond us. I returned to my station and ran new calculations. The cull body's trajectories were predictable now that we knew what to look for. Slow approaches toward degrading structures, contact, collapse, detachment. None of them moved toward us. None of them seemed to have noticed we existed. That lasted until Day 7. On Day 7, Walker's tracking showed a deviation. One cull body, not the original, which had moved on to another degrading structure, altered course. Its new trajectory no longer targeted a collapsing cosmos. Its new trajectory intersected our position. I calculated the approach time, 9 days at the current velocity. I reported it to Halyard. She convened an emergency briefing. The crew gathered in the observation blister, watching the cull body grow fractionally larger with each sensor update. Options. Halyard's voice was calm, command voice. We can attempt evasive maneuvers. Walker brought up fuel calculations. The Vituvian has enough thrust to move significantly, but if the cull body is tracking us specifically rather than our coordinate, moving won't help. We don't know it's tracking us. Doyle's voice was tight. It could be approaching a degrading structure we haven't detected. It could be responding to something else entirely. There are no degrading structures in our vicinity. Walker flicked through surveys. Everything within sensor range is healthy by our metrics. We're the only anomaly here. Define anomaly, Halyard said. Something that doesn't fit the pattern. We came from inside a structure. We crossed its membrane. As far as we know, nothing has ever done that. If the immune system responds to irregularities, we're the most irregular thing in this environment. The briefing stretched. Some argued we should flee immediately. Others wanted to stay and observe, hoping contact might yield data we couldn't get otherwise. Brennan didn't argue. He sat in the corner watching the trajectory display, lips moving without sound. Halyard decided to wait. The approach would take 9 days. That gave us time to gather more data, to understand more, to make better decisions. If the cull body changed course or accelerated, we'd reassess. Until then, we would observe. I documented the decision and went back to monitoring. That night, Andrik found me running hull degradation analyses. The conversion was accelerating, not dramatically, but measurably. The patterns in the metal were more elaborate now. The silicate spheres forming configurations the computer flagged as statistically improbable. "I've been monitoring crew vitals," Andrik said from the doorway. He didn't enter. His posture was rigid, his face carefully blank. 3 people haven't slept in over 40 hours. Brennan, Doyle, and Yates. Their cortisol levels are wrong. Elevated? Flatlined, not elevated. The opposite. Their bodies have stopped responding to stress, like the fear response has been edited out. I added the data to my logs. Cortisol suppression could indicate exhaustion, but exhaustion produced other markers. This wasn't that. "Have you told Halyard?" "I'm telling you first. You're the one who documents what's breaking." "What do you want me to do with it?" "Tell me if we're already compromised, if whatever touched the probes is touching us, if the conversion in the hull has started in the crew." The molecular monitoring focused on the ship's structure, not biological tissue. I could extend it, run scans on the crew, look for the same signatures in human cells. The prospect wasn't appealing. "I'll run the analysis," I said. "It'll take time." He nodded and left. The analysis was inconclusive. No silicate signatures in blood samples. Subtle changes in cellular structure I couldn't explain. I logged the findings and flagged them for follow-up. Before I slept, I reviewed my personal logs. The entries were thorough, clinical, complete. They recorded everything I'd observed and nothing I'd felt. That was how I'd been trained. That was how I survived. That night, in the space between waking and sleep, I saw things I couldn't document. Corridors on the ship I'd never walked. Damage patterns I hadn't witnessed. Conversations I hadn't had, playing out in familiar voices. I filed it under fatigue. Minds generate noise when they're processing too much information too fast. I didn't log the dreams. Some things don't belong in official documentation. Outside my viewport, the cull body kept approaching. 8 days remaining. I watched it grow by fractions against the backdrop of drifting cosmoses, then closed my eyes and waited for morning. The cull body grew in the viewport by increments too small to see directly. Each morning I compared sensor readings to the previous day's logs and confirmed what the numbers already said. It was closer. Not dramatically closer. Not rushing us. Just drifting on a trajectory that would intersect our position in a steadily decreasing number of days. Day 1 of the approach, I ran contact scenarios. The computer couldn't model them properly. No data existed on what happened when a cull body touched something that wasn't a cosmic structure. But I could extrapolate from the probes. The first had experienced temporal distortion. The second had been converted at the molecular level. Either outcome was possible. Both were possible. Outcomes we couldn't imagine were also possible. I presented my findings to Halyard in her quarters on day 2. The quarters were small, functional, identical to everyone else's except for the command terminal on her desk. She listened without interrupting while I walked through the failure modes. "The conversion scenario is the clearest," I said, pulling up hull data. "If contact accelerates the process we're already seeing, we could lose structural integrity within hours. The temporal scenario is harder. The first probe's clock discrepancy was 11 years. If we experience something similar, return window calculations collapse. And if both happen?" she asked. "Then we're converted into organized dust while experiencing time at a rate 11 years slower than our origin. The distinction won't matter to us." She studied the data, fingers moving across the terminal as she ran her own calculations. "Recommendations. Prepare for departure. We still have 8 days before contact and the data has value. but be ready to leave on short notice if the approach accelerates or contact produces effects we can't survive. And if departure isn't possible, I've considered that. I had been considering it since Walker spotted the trajectory change. Then we document everything and hope the documentation survives. The probe data made it back. Whatever converted the second probe didn't destroy the probe. If we're converted, the Vituvian might still return on autopilot. The data might be recoverable. That's not a survival strategy. No, it's a documentation strategy. Survival may not be available. She dismissed me. I went back to monitoring. Day 4. The crew's responses to the approach diverged. Walker drowned herself in trajectory analysis, running calculations every few hours to confirm what we already knew. The numbers gave her something to do that felt like preparation. I understood that impulse. I was doing the same thing with my failure models. Barrow shifted from hull diagnostics to engine maintenance. If we needed to leave quickly, the engines had to be ready. He worked double shifts, checking systems that didn't need checking, running tests that returned yesterday's results. The work kept him from thinking about what was coming. Andrich stopped talking to most of the crew. He spent his shifts alone, reviewing the ship's defensive systems, weapons that couldn't affect something the size of a solar system, shields that couldn't block forces we couldn't measure. When I passed him in the corridor, he was reading his personal terminal. I caught a glimpse of the screen, self-destruct protocols. He wasn't activating them. He was memorizing sequences, preparing for a decision he hadn't made yet. Brennan retreated into theory. He spent his days in the observation blister, watching the cull body approach, filling tablets with notes. When I asked what he was working on, he showed me a diagram. Our universe as a circle, the cull body as an elongated shape touching the circle's edge, arrows indicating directions of information flow. I'm trying to understand what it's looking for. His hand shook as he pointed. Biological immune systems respond to specific markers, foreign proteins, damaged cells, abnormal growth. There must be criteria, something distinguishing healthy cosmoses from sick ones. Any candidates? Several. Entropy gradients that deviate from expected values, complexity emergence beyond baseline predictions, boundary violations, objects crossing from inside to outside a membrane. He looked at me. We're a boundary violation. We left our structure. If the immune system responds to irregular crossings, we've already triggered it. Then why approach slowly? I asked. Why not a reflex response? I don't know. Maybe there's an assessment phase, a period where the system gauges whether the irregularity matters. Or maybe the approach speed is fast by its standards. 9 days is nothing to an organism that runs on billion-year cycles. To it, this might be a sprint. I logged the conversation and moved on. Brennan's theories were plausible and untestable. We couldn't verify what the cull body was looking for. We could only watch it come closer and record what happened when it arrived. Day 6. Doyle stopped sleeping entirely. I noticed because I monitored crew vitals as part of my documentation. His cortisol had been flatlined since day 3. Now his sleep cycles had vanished. Biosensors showed continuous waking activity. No REM, no slow wave. He should have been collapsing. Instead, he was covering his walls with equations. I visited him on the evening of day 6. His door was unlocked. Crisis protocol. He stood in front of a wall that was no longer a wall but a surface of notation, every centimeter filled with mathematical symbols. The equations were dense and interconnected, referencing variables and operations I didn't recognize. West. He didn't turn. Come to document my deterioration. Come to check on a crew member who hasn't slept in 72 hours. Sleep is inefficient. There's too much to calculate. He added another line. Do you know what I've realized? The structures we've been observing aren't just containers. They're computations. Each universe is a calculation being performed. Galaxies, stars, planets, life, they're operations in an equation we can't read. That's a significant claim. It's obvious once you see it. Look at the circulation patterns, the way internal clusters interact. It's not random drift or gravity, it's processing. Information moving through a system, being transformed, producing outputs we can't measure. He finally turned. His eyes were wrong, not just dilated with exhaustion, but focused past me, as if something behind my shoulder held his attention. We're variables, West. The entire human species is a variable in our universe's calculation. When the cull body touches us, it's going to read our value. I didn't argue. Argument wouldn't reach him. You should rest, I said. Even if you can't sleep, the approach will take 3 more days. You'll want to be functional when contact happens. I'm functional, more functional than I've ever been. He turned back to the equations. Go document someone else. I have work. I logged the encounter. Doyle showed clear signs of cognitive alteration, grandiose ideation, sleep loss, inappropriate affect. Whether the cause was psychological or something else, I couldn't determine. I flagged him for monitoring and continued my rounds. Yates was in the observation blister. She'd been spending most of her time there, silent, watching the cull body approach. When I entered, she didn't acknowledge me. I stood beside her and looked out. The cull body was visible now without sensor enhancement. A dark shape against the luminous backdrop of drifting cosmoses, its filaments trailing like a comet's tail. The shape was wrong in ways I couldn't articulate, alien, but also incomplete, as if information my brain expected to receive simply wasn't there. It's beautiful, Yates said, almost startling herself. She hadn't spoken to anyone in days. Don't you think it's beautiful? I think it's very large. That's not what I asked. She looked at me, calm, almost peaceful. It's going to touch us. In 3 days, it will touch the ship and everything will be different. Doesn't that seem beautiful? The possibility of being different? Different how? I don't know. That's what makes it beautiful. We can't know. We can only wait and be changed. I had nothing useful to say. I logged her words and left her at the viewport. Day 9. The cull body filled the blister. Its smallest visible filament was wider than Earth's moon. I'd run the numbers twice and still couldn't make them feel real. We were looking at something larger than our solar system, close enough that the viewport couldn't contain it. The crew assembled because there was nowhere else to be. Halyard stood at the front, posture rigid, face composed. Walker sat at her console, watching approach telemetry that no longer mattered. Barrow stood near the exit, hand resting on the frame. Andrick stayed at the back, eyes moving more over faces than displays. Brennan had stopped writing. He stared at the viewport with the fixed intensity of someone watching a prophecy arrive. Doyle stood apart, lips moving in what might have been calculations. Yates was closest to the viewport, palm against the glass, breath fogging and clearing in small bursts. Contact in approximately 4 minutes. Walker's voice stayed steady. Approach has been constant, no change in speed or heading. Defensive systems? Halyard asked. Ready, Walker said, for whatever good they'll do. They wouldn't do any good. Ritual questions, ritual answers. Humans do that when they face things they can't control. The cull body swelled in the viewport. Its surface was textured with patterns I couldn't interpret. Ridges and valleys, structures that might have been organs or processes. Filaments moved with slow, deliberate purpose, splitting and rejoining in almost linguistic configurations, as if it was communicating with itself or with something we couldn't perceive. 2 minutes. The ship's systems began to wander. Power fluctuations in non-critical grids. Clock discrepancies that had grown from fractions of a second to nearly a minute. Molecular monitoring showed accelerated changes in the hull, the silicate patterns spreading faster than in the previous 8 days combined. 1 minute. Brennan started to speak, cut himself off. The cull body extended a tendril toward us. The tendril was vast, capable of wrapping a star. It moved slowly, like a surgical instrument operating on a scale that made surgery meaningless. Contact. The tendril touched the hull. The touch was soft. I'd braced for impact, for violent acceleration, for the ship to shake or tear. None of that happened. The contact was gentle, almost delicate, the brush of a finger against something microscopic. Every instrument on the ship spiked. Displays flared with data, radiation, gravity, electromagnetic spectra, driven off scale at once. Alerts flooded Walker's console faster than she could clear them. The lights dimmed and brightened in patterns that had nothing to do with power distribution. The cosmic microwave background, the faint radiation echo of our universe's birth, fluctuated. Not here, not locally, everywhere. Instruments showed ripples across the entire observable spectrum, in every direction, at every distance we could measure. The background of our home universe shifted, rippled, reacted. Doyle spoke first, voice quiet, almost reverent. It felt us. The whole thing felt us. We just made our universe flinch. No one answered. The cull body held position, tendril pressed to our hull, motionless except for the slow motion of its filaments. It didn't attack. It didn't retreat. It examined us. The cull body remained attached. I stopped trusting the ship's clocks on my day 3 of contact. They'd been disagreeing since we crossed the horizon, but now the disagreements were measured in hours. The primary navigation clock read 18 days since contact. The backup in the systems bay read 15. The manual chronometer I'd started, scratch marks on a panel near my station, showed 17. I compared tallies with Walker on what I called day 4. Her count said 14. We stopped comparing after that. The numbers weren't going to converge. Knowing they diverged didn't help us function. Time failed in other ways. The audio logs contained conversations that hadn't happened. Recordings from day 2 of contact captured my own voice describing a fire in the engineering bay, damage, containment protocols, repair timelines. There had been no fire. The engineering bay was intact. The recording was time-stamped, authenticated. My voice discussing events that hadn't occurred. I played it for Halyard. She listened, told me to delete it. I logged the instruction but kept the file. Documentation was my job, even when the documentation made no sense. Spatial anomalies were worse. Crew reported seeing each other in 2 locations at once. Brennan in the blister and in his quarters, both at the same moment, both apparently real. Andric walked into the systems bay while I was at my console and asked why I'd left the mess hall so abruptly. I hadn't been in the mess hall. I'd been here 6 hours. He insisted he'd just spoken to me there, that I'd been eating a ration bar and complaining about the clocks. The conversation existed only in his memory. One night, I woke to find the observation blister empty of stars. Every viewport showed only the interior of the cull body's membrane, a vast curved surface that blocked everything beyond. I stared for what felt like hours, watching patterns move across it, shapes that might have been organs or processes. When the morning cycle began, the stars were back. The membrane still touched the hull, but the viewports showed normal space. No one else remembered the absence. Walker suggested I get more sleep. I logged the incident and didn't mention it again. The crew fractured along lines I'd predicted and lines I hadn't. Andric became convinced the inspection was over. He found me in the systems bay on what my tally called Day 7, face hollow from sleeplessness, movements sharp with stimulants. It's decided. He leaned against the console, close enough that I could see the tremor in his hands. Whatever the cull body was looking for, it found. We failed. Our universe is marked. We have no evidence of that. We have no evidence of anything. His mouth tightened. That's the point. We can't know what it's looking for, so we can't know if we've satisfied the criteria or failed them. But look at us. He gestured around us. Time is coming apart. Space is unreliable. People are seeing and hearing things that don't exist. The inspection isn't just observing us. It's altering us. When we go back to Earth, we'll bring those changes with us. You're saying we've been contaminated? I'm saying we're the contamination now. The ship came from a universe that might or might not be healthy. The ship crossed the boundary, which is itself pathological behavior. Now the ship has been touched by the immune system, examined, altered. When we return, we carry the verdict with us. His eyes were too bright. We're the disease, West. We always were. The only question is whether we spread it or stop it here. I processed his argument. It was coherent, internally consistent, and unverifiable. What are you proposing? I'm not proposing anything. I'm telling you what I see, so that when I do propose something, you'll know why. He left. I logged the conversation and flagged him for behavioral monitoring, although I was no longer sure what counted as normal. The baseline had shifted too far. Brennan stopped speaking on my day 9. He communicated by written notes, handed to whoever passed his quarters or left at stations where specific crew would find them. The notes were dense, technical, full of diagrams and equations Doyle might have understood if Doyle had been capable of understanding anything. My first note arrived outside the briefing compartment on day 10. Brennan pressed it into my hand, expression flat, eyes tracking something I couldn't see. The note read, "The organism may not distinguish between the ship and the cosmos it came from. At this scale, we are not a foreign object. We are a symptom. A universe that produces vessels capable of leaving itself is a universe exhibiting pathological behavior. The ship is not being inspected as an intruder. The ship is being read as a diagnostic marker. The question is not whether we are dangerous. The question is whether our home has developed a terminal condition." I read it twice, folded it, and filed it with my documentation. Brennan watched, nodded once, and walked away. Doyle was found dead on my day 12. Barrow discovered the body during a routine check. He paged me with stripped-down urgency. "West, Doyle's quarters, you need to see this." The door was sealed from inside, privacy protocol, but Barrow had overridden it. The quarters were small, identical to everyone else's, and felt smaller because of what covered the walls. Equations, hundreds, maybe thousands, written in Doyle's precise hand from floor to ceiling. The notation matched what I'd seen on day 6, more elaborate now, more interconnected. Lines of calculation flowed into each other, referenced each other, building structures of logic I couldn't follow. Doyle's body was in the center of the room. He sat in his chair facing a wall of his densest calculations. His eyes were open. His hands rested on the armrests, palms up, fingers slightly curled. There was no visible trauma. Biosensors showed cardiac arrest approximately 6 hours earlier. The alert had failed to trigger amidst the system's other glitches. No obvious underlying cause, except for the position. Doyle sat 3 feet above the floor. The chair hadn't moved. The chair was on the deck where it had always been. Doyle's body was above it, suspended in the air in a sitting posture with no visible support. I circled the body slowly, documenting. No wires, no harness, no structural alteration to the room. Biosensors registered no life. He was dead. He had been dead for hours. The body should have fallen. It hadn't. Halyard arrived. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, then asked, "Cause of death?" "Unknown. No visible injury. Biosensors show cardiac arrest without logged cause. The position," I gestured. "I have no explanation for the position." "The equations?" "I can't interpret them. Brennan might have earlier. Doyle was the only other crew member with that background." Halyard moved around the perimeter, studying walls and body. Her face didn't change, but I could see the calculations. A crew member had died. The cause was unknown. The body violated basic physics. We were still attached to a cull body that might or might not be responsible. "Document everything," she said. "The equations, the position, every detail. Then seal the quarters. We don't have the resources for an autopsy, and I'm not sure an autopsy would tell us anything useful." I documented. 3 hours photographing, transcribing, measuring. When I finished, I sealed the door, and added the incident to my logs. Doyle, Dr. Quentin, day 12 post-contact. Cause of death, unknown. Body position at discovery. Seated posture 3 feet above floor surface, no visible support mechanism. Circumstances, unexplained. Halyard convened a meeting on day 14. The remaining crew gathered: Halyard, Walker, Barrow, Andrick, Yates, and me. Brennan attended but didn't participate. He sat in the corner writing again. The agenda was simple: the return window. Fuel, Walker said, bringing up the data. We have enough for departure, but margins are thinner than projected. Engine efficiency has dropped since contact. Systems draw more fuel than they should. Engineering can't identify the cause. How thin? Halyard asked. If we leave within 72 hours, we can make translation back with a small reserve. If we wait, the reserve vanishes. Wait much longer, and departure becomes impossible. The room took that in. 72 hours. 3 days to decide whether to stay or go, assuming we still had a choice. The cull body, Barrow said. Any sign it will let us go? None, I said. The tendrils stayed attached. No motion, no change in position, no response to anything we've done. Functionally, we're anchored. Can we detach forcibly? He asked. Fire engines, pull away. Unknown. We don't know the mechanism of attachment. We don't know what breaking it might trigger. Contact didn't damage us. A forced separation might. Andrick spoke. We shouldn't go back. The compartment went quiet. If Brennan is right, if we're being read as a diagnostic marker, then returning to Earth confirms something about our universe's health. A universe that can produce boundary-crossing vessels is a universe with pathological complexity. A universe whose boundary-crossing vessel returns after immune contact is a universe that can't self-correct. He looked around. We're the symptom. Our return might mark our entire cosmos for culling. We don't know that, Walker said. We don't know what the cull bodies are looking for. We don't know what counts as pathological. We're basing decisions on metaphors, not data. We're basing decisions on the only framework that fits what we've seen. The cull bodies target degrading structures. We came from a structure. We crossed its boundary. We've been touched by the immune system and held for inspection. What interpretation fits better? The one where we're a curiosity. She held his gaze. Where the immune system examines us because we're unusual, not dangerous. Where contact is observation, not judgment. And if you're wrong? Andrick asked. And if you're wrong, she shot back. If we destroy ourselves here based on a theory that turns out to be false, we've accomplished nothing but dying for no reason. The argument circled. Halyard let it run until it exhausted itself, then cut in. We leave, she said. The mission parameters were always observation and return. Whatever we've learned, whatever we suspect, the authority needs this data. If we're wrong about the implications, the information still matters. If we're right... She paused. If we're right, the choice was never ours. A universe that can be condemned because one ship returned from a boundary crossing was already condemned by the conditions that produced the ship. Andrick started to object. Halyard lifted a hand. We leave in 70 hours. Prepare the ship for departure. Dismissed. The crew dispersed. I stayed to compile notes. Halyard stayed, facing the viewport that looked out over a section of hull. The same hull still pressed against a cull body's tendril. West. She didn't turn. If you had to decide right now, leave or stay, what would you choose? I considered it like a failure model, weighing probabilities I couldn't calculate. I'd need to know what we're trying to preserve. The crew, the ship, the data, the parameters, or the underlying purpose? All of it, she said. None of it. Whatever you think matters. Outside the hull, beyond the tendril, the cellular universe drifted, structures full of cosmoses, metabolisms on scales that made human life less than a rounding error. We had come here to learn. We had learned that we were smaller than we had imagined, and that our smallness might be the only thing keeping us unnoticed. I'd leave, I said. Not because I think it's safe, because staying only gives us more time to be afraid. The data we have is the data we'll have. Another week of observation won't change the fundamental uncertainty. We either return and face the consequences, or we stay until the ship fails and our documentation dies with us. And if Andrik is right, if our return triggers something, then the trigger was always going to be pulled. We existed, we developed, we built ships and crossed boundaries. If that's enough to condemn our universe, the condemnation started long before we launched. Halyard nodded slowly. That's approximately my calculation as well. She left. I finished my documentation and went back to my station to prepare for departure. Outside the viewport, the cull body waited, vast and patient. In 70 hours we would test whether it would release us. 41 hours remained when Yates disappeared. I caught it during a routine check. Her quarters were empty, bed unused, personal effects undisturbed, biosensors showing no recent activity. I searched the obvious locations. Blister, mess, systems bay, nothing. The ship wasn't big enough for someone to vanish. She had vanished anyway. I reported to Halyard. She ordered a compartment-by-compartment search. Barrow took engineering. Andrik took crew quarters. I took storage bays and maintenance corridors. The spaces no one visited unless something broke. I found her in the forward maintenance crawlway, a narrow passage beneath the navigation blister. She sat cross-legged in the dark, facing bare hull plating. Her right hand rested against the metal. Her lips moved without sound. Yates. She didn't respond. I crawled closer and saw what she was looking at. The hull plating here had changed. The silicate patterns I'd been documenting for weeks were denser, more elaborate, forming configurations that almost looked like text. Not any alphabet I recognized, but something organized. Yates's fingers traced the lines as if following sentences. "We need to go back to the main compartments," I said. "Departure is in 41 hours. 37. Her voice was distant, dreamy. "The clocks are wrong. It's 37 hours. They told me." "Who told you?" She turned. Her eyes were clear, focused, entirely sane, which made the answer worse. "The patterns. They're not just conversion, West. They're writing. The cull body is writing on the ship. It's been writing since contact. I can almost read it." I didn't argue. Telling her it was just molecular reorganization wouldn't change what she saw. I helped her to her feet and guided her back along the crawlway. She came willingly but kept looking back at the hull. I logged the incident and adjusted my own departure estimate to 37 hours. Her number felt as plausible as any other. 30 hours before departure, Halyard called us to the briefing compartment. We were fewer. Doyle was dead. Brennan was present but absent, scribbling on his tablet without looking up. Yates sat beside me, attention drifting between the room and some interior space. That left Halyard, Walker, Barrow, Andrik and me to decide for a mission that had already cost more than we understood. "Status," Halyard said. "Navigation is functional," Walker said. "Translation coordinates are locked. Engine efficiency continues to decline. We're at 83% of projected output. But margin is sufficient if we leave within the window." "Hull integrity is compromised but holding," Barrow said. "Conversion has reached 31% of the outer plating. Structural failure still sits 2 weeks out on the current curve, but the rate has varied. It could accelerate." Andrik stayed silent through the reports. He watched us with the expression I'd learned over the past weeks. Calculation. "The cull body," Halyard said, looking at me. "Any change?" "None. Tendril remains attached. No motion, no response to our preparations. If it's aware of our departure plans, it's not signaling it." "Then we proceed. Final departure checks start in 6 hours. All crew at stations 12 hours before translation. Questions?" Andrik stood. His movement was controlled, rehearsed. "The self-destruct protocols. I want them armed." Silence dropped over the compartment. "Explain," Halyard said. Her posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, into something that belonged on a firing range. If departure fails, if the cull body prevents separation or translation damages the ship, we need the option to destroy the vessel completely. No chance of the ship drifting back to our universe as evidence of what we found. That's not a departure protocol, Halyard said. That's a failure contingency. The mission has already failed. Andrik's tone stayed calm. We came to observe and document. We've observed things we can't understand and documented events we can't explain. 2 crew dead or non-functional. The ship is being converted into something we can't classify. We're about to attempt translation through a boundary that may have changed, while attached to an entity that may not let us go. Arming self-destruct isn't pessimism, it's preparation. And if you decide to use it on your own initiative? She asked. I won't, he said. Not without your authorization. Your word on that? My word. She studied him. I watched both of them, cataloguing the micro-expressions. Andrik was telling the truth. He wouldn't act without authorization. He still wanted the option. Denied, Halyard said. Self-destruct remains locked. If we fail to depart, we continue documenting until the ship fails. The data has a value even if we don't survive. The data has value only if someone retrieves it, Andrik said. If the ship drifts here indefinitely, then it drifts, she said. That's not a reason to destroy it. Dismissed. The crew filed out. Andrik was last. He paused in the doorway, looking back at Halyard with an unreadable expression, then left. The compartment was empty, except for Halyard and me. He's going to try something, I said. Probably. She moved to the viewport, looking at the curve of hull where the tendril pressed. Watch him. If he moves toward reactor controls or the self-destruct panel, stop him. How? I asked. However you need to. She turned. I'm not asking you to hurt him. I'm asking you to keep him from killing all of us because he decides that's mercy. Can you do that? Andrik was security trained, stronger, more experienced in physical confrontation. Stopping him wouldn't be simple. I had other advantages, knowledge of systems, choke points, his habits. I can try, I said. That's all I'm asking. 22 hours before departure, I found Andrik in the systems bay. He was at my station, reviewing hull conversion data. The displays showed progression, pattern spreading, molecular structure shifting, the ship becoming something else. 31%, he said without looking up. That's the outer hull. What about the interior? 7% in primary conduits, I said. 4% in life support infrastructure. Conversion is moving inward, slower than outside. And the crew? He turned. You've been scanning. I saw the logs. What did you find? The biological data was flagged confidential, Halyard's orders to prevent panic. Andrik had seen enough to know the scans existed. Lying would waste time. Inconclusive, I said. No silicate in blood or tissue, but there are unexplained changes, cellular structures and metabolic patterns that don't match baseline. Subtle. Could be stress. Could be something else. Could be conversion, he said. Could be. He faced the display again, resting his hands on the console. I'm not going to sabotage the mission, West. I know Halyard asked you to watch for that. She didn't use that word. She didn't have to. He brought up power distribution. I want us to leave. I want us to make it back to Earth. But I also want to be realistic about what we bring. What do you think we're bringing? I don't know, he said. That's the problem. Brennan thinks we're a diagnostic marker, that our return confirms something about our universe's health. Maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong. But look at us. He gestured at the display. We're not the same ship that crossed the horizon. We're not the same crew. Something has been done to us. We don't know what. We're about to carry that something back into a universe full of people who don't know we exist. The alternative is dying here, I said. The alternative is certainty. He watched the displays. We die here. Any contamination dies with us. We return, and whatever we've become spreads to everyone we contact. Scientists studying this data. Engineers examining this ship. families touching returning crew. His voice stayed quiet, almost gentle. I'm not saying we should destroy ourselves. I'm saying we should understand the choice. Mission was always about returning with data, I said. Whatever we've become, the data has value. People on Earth will study it, analyze it, try to understand what we found. Maybe they'll see signs of contamination. Maybe they'll find ways to defend themselves. Or maybe Brennan's wrong, and we're just a damaged ship with a traumatized crew, and the organism doesn't care whether we come back. Do you believe that? He asked. I don't believe anything, I said. I document what happens and let other people draw conclusions. He almost smiled. That must be restful. It's functional. He stepped back, giving me my console. I won't touch the self-destruct. You have my word. But if departure fails, if the cull body stops us or translation goes wrong, I want you to remember what I said. Someone may have to make a decision. Halyard won't. And you think that someone should be me? I asked. I think you're the only one who can look at catastrophe and see it clearly. The rest of us are too invested in survival. You just document. He moved towards the exit, paused. That's not an insult. It's why you're still functional when the rest of us aren't. He left. I went back to my logs and tried not to think about whether he was right. 12 hours before departure. Final checks. Walker confirmed navigation. Barrow confirmed engines. I confirmed that critical systems would survive translation, probably. Conversion still spread, but slowly. Margins existed. Small, shrinking, but present. Brennan stayed in the blister, watching the cull body's surface. He hadn't spoken in days, hadn't written in hours. When I approached to confirm his station assignment, he didn't respond. His eyes tracked something on the membrane. Patterns, movements too subtle for me to see. Dr. Brennan, we need you at your station in 4 hours. Nothing. Dr. Brennan, confirmation. He turned slowly, as if movement cost more than he could afford. His eyes met mine. For a moment I saw distance, someone looking at me from very far away. Then he nodded once and turned back to the viewport. I logged the nod as confirmation and moved on. Yates was in the crawlway again, hand on the converted hull, lips moving. When I told her we were leaving in 12 hours, she smiled. The first genuine expression I'd seen from her since contact. The writing will come with us, she said. They're not finished, but we'll carry the message even if they don't complete it. What message? I asked. I don't know yet. I can almost read it. A few more days and I might understand. We don't have a few more days, I said. We're leaving in 12 hours. I know. She stood, brushing imaginary dust from her uniform. That's why I said almost. I'll never know what it says. I'll carry it anyway. That's something. I walked her to her station and strapped her in. She went willingly, still smiling, eyes focused on something that wasn't there. 4 hours before departure, I made my last rounds. The ship was ready. The documentation was as complete as I could make it for events that defied documentation. I'd recorded everything measurable and noted everything that wasn't. I went to the observation blister one last time. The cull body filled the viewport, vast and patient, tendrils still pressed to our hull. In 4 hours, we would fire the engines and attempt to pull away. We would see if it released us or held us or did something we hadn't thought of. I watched its surface. Patterns shifted slowly, forming and reforming in configurations that might have been thought, metabolism, or something else. I couldn't read them. I couldn't understand them. I could only observe and wait. Yates was right about one thing. Something would go back with us. The conversion in the hull, the changes in our cells, the things we'd seen and the ways those things had changed us. Whatever the cull body wrote on our ship, we would deliver it to Earth whether we could read it or not. I went back to my station and waited for departure. Departure was not gentle. The moment the engines fired, the cull body released us. No gradual withdrawal. One instant of contact, the next of empty space. The tendrils snapped away faster than the sensors could track. The ship lurched with the sudden loss of resistance, and the stars began to move. I watched through a viewport as the cull body receded. It held position, filaments reorganizing slowly. Attention, if attention was the right word, already elsewhere. We had been examined. We had been released. Whatever judgment had been rendered was opaque. The translation back was rougher than the outbound crossing. The gradient that had been smooth before was turbulent. Spatial distortions threw the ship sideways. Hull stress spiked into breach warning ranges every few minutes. I watched numbers climb toward critical thresholds and dip back, climb and dip, a rhythm of near failure that felt endless. The stars returned in fragments. Not the gradual brightening we'd seen going out, but sudden clusters, like reality rebuilding itself in patches. One moment the viewport showed void, the next, a slice of familiar constellations, the next, a different slice at a different angle. The navigation computer stuttered over the inputs, flashing error flags Walker cleared as fast as they appeared. Then the shaking stopped. The displays stabilized. The computer reported normal space. We were 17 days from Earth. I compiled the casualty report during the first day of the return journey. Andrik was dead. Restraint failure during translation. His harness had malfunctioned at the worst possible moment, and spatial distortions had done the rest. Barrow found the body when we stabilized, still strapped into a seat that hadn't held him. The injuries matched high G trauma, the kind you get when a human body meets an immovable surface at velocities bone can't withstand. I documented the death and sealed the compartment. Another room no one would enter again. Barrow was alive but altered. He hadn't spoken since we crossed back. His eyes didn't track movement correctly. They fixed on empty points, following things no one else could see. Bioscanners showed activity in visual processing regions, but the patterns didn't match any normal stimulus response. He was seeing something. I couldn't determine what. Brennan breathed, but might as well have been absent. We found him at his station after translation, vital signs stable, eyes open, body flinching to basic stimuli. When Halyard spoke, he didn't answer. His tablet showed the same fragment of an equation repeated hundreds of times, a loop of calculation that went nowhere. The survivors, Halyard, Walker, Yates, and me, 4 out of 8. Better than my usual ratio, but not by much. The days passed. The ship held. Conversion had slowed to below measurable rates in critical systems. Walker held our course. Halyard held command. Yates held whatever internal state she'd retreated into, silent but compliant, doing what she was told without seeming to register why. I held to documentation. The reports were clinical, comprehensive, incomplete. They recorded the discovery, the contact, the losses. They catalogued anomalies, changes, events that defied explanation. They didn't speculate on meaning. That wasn't my function. On day 12 of the return journey, Halyard called me to her quarters. She looked older than when we launched. The mission had taken something more than sleep and calories. The certainty commanders are supposed to project had worn thin, exposing raw calculation. "The Authority will want a summary," she said, gesturing at a display showing our communications queue, encrypted messages ready to send when we hit Earth's relay network. Not the full documentation, something they can read in an hour and think they understand. Understand what? I asked. That's the question. She turned. What do we tell them, West? What's the message? The full documentation ran to thousands of pages. Sensor logs, crew reports, observational data, casualty records. Teams of analysts would take months to process it. The Authority would still want something distilled, something like a conclusion. I didn't have one. We tell them what we observed, I said. Bounded cosmic structures behaving like cells at unprecedented scales. Mobile entities targeting degrading structures and performing functions consistent with an immune response. Contact with one such entity, resulting in extended inspection and crew casualties. Departure and return, with ship and crew showing signs of molecular alteration similar to patterns observed in unmanned probes. "And the implications?" she asked. "We don't state implications," I said. "We present data. They draw conclusions." She shook her head. "They'll want conclusions. They'll want to know if we're safe, if the universe is safe, if what we found is a threat. They won't accept we saw something big and strange and it touched us." "Then they'll be disappointed," I said. "We can't tell them things we don't know." She pulled up a file. Brennan's notes, written before he stopped communicating. Diagnostic marker theory. The idea that our universe might be marked for culling based on our behavior. "Brennan had conclusions," she said. "Andric had conclusions. Even Yates has conclusions in her way. Everyone who survived has a theory. Why not include those?" "Because they're theories," I said. "Unverified, untestable, possibly wrong. Presented as conclusions, they'd be claims we can't support. And if we omit them, we withhold information that might be critical," she said. I thought about it. The full documentation included everything. Brennan's notes, Andric's arguments, Yates's claims about writing on the hull. Anyone who read the full reports would encounter those theories. A summary, though, shaped interpretation. A summary told people what to think. "Include the theories as crew interpretations," I said finally. "Label them speculative. Attribute them to the people who proposed them. Let the authority weigh them against the data. That's their job." Halyard nodded. "Write it. I want the summary ready before we hit communications range." I wrote it. 40 pages, long for a summary and short for a mission that had redrawn the map of reality. I included Brennan's diagnostic marker hypothesis, Andric's contamination concerns, Yates's claims about intentional communication. I labeled them clearly, attributed them, presented them without endorsement. The authority would read it and decide. They might be wrong. The data didn't support firm conclusions. They would draw them anyway. I transmitted the summary when we reached relay range and waited for a response. The response came 12 hours before arrival. Encrypted acknowledgement, quarantine protocols, instructions to maintain isolation on docking. No celebration, no questions, procedures. I wasn't surprised. The authority operates on classification levels and need to know. Whatever they thought of the summary, they wouldn't share it with the crew that wrote it. We were data sources now. On the final day, I went to the observation blister. Earth filled the viewport. Blue, white, green, wrapped in cloud that caught sunlight and scattered it into colors I'd almost forgotten. After weeks of void and cellular structures and galaxy-sized drift patterns, the planet looked small. A marble. A speck. One world around one star in one galaxy in one bounded cosmos that might or might not be healthy by standards we couldn't comprehend. I thought about Brennan's theory, the one I'd transcribed for the summary, the one that suggested our return might confirm a pathological diagnosis. If he was right, Earth was looking at its own death sentence without knowing it. Every person, every city and forest and ocean lived inside a cell that could be pruned at any moment, for reasons they couldn't influence or understand. Or he was wrong, and none of it mattered. And we were just a damaged ship returning from a mission that had cost too much and answered nothing. The data didn't distinguish between those interpretations. It only supported observation. The cull body had touched us. It held us for weeks, inspecting, assessing, doing things we couldn't perceive. Then it released us, and we returned, and now we were here. I had documented everything. That was my function. That was all I knew how to do. We docked, hatches opened. Men in sealed suits boarded to escort us to quarantine. Halyard went first, under her own power, posture straight. Walker followed, supporting Barrow, who moved like a sleepwalker. Yates went last of the crew, pausing at the hatch to look back at the corridors, where we had lived and died and been changed, at the walls where the conversion patterns still spread. I walked out behind them, carrying my terminal and its records of everything that broke. The docking bay was bright after shipboard lighting. I squinted and saw figures in the distance, authority officials, medical staff, security. They would take us to quarantine, study us, examine what we had brought back. They would read my documentation and draw conclusions I hadn't drawn. I didn't look back at the Vituvian. Looking back changed nothing. You documented, you triaged, you kept the functional parts running as long as you could. Through the docking bay's windows, Earth turned slowly in the light of a sun that had burned for 4.5 billion years. One cell in an organism that didn't know we existed, couldn't be influenced by our choices, wouldn't notice if we disappeared. The universe was vast and indifferent, and we were here anyway, small and fragile and temporary. I followed the others into quarantine and began preparing my final report.